Which planet should you visit first? What techs should you prioritize? When should you start engaging with quality, and what should you be focusing? How should you scale SPM once you're ready to do so? In this guide, we will be trying to answer all these questions and then more. This assumes you are playing mostly on default settings and you understand the basics of Factorio. You know which way the inserter points, and you've hopefully at least launched a rocket in the base game. This is my take on how to progress. There's obviously a lot of different opinions on this, but one of the biggest things I will be focusing on with this progression guide is minimizing refactoring. What is refactoring? Refactoring is when you realize your base sucks and you need to Alt-D the whole thing and start over. Sometimes this can be because you realize there's some design flaw in it. Other times it can be because you unlock some new technology and you need to tear down all your old assembler green circuit factories to make EMP ones. I'm mostly going to be talking about non-achievements in here, although I will be stating the changes you will need to deviate from with this guide in order to get achievement runs. The three that mainly apply are the logistic embargo, the no purple and yellow until you research another planet's science, and the artillery one where you need to destroy an enemy biter nest with artillery first. That's the most annoying one. So just real quick, right now this is my current base. We're about 1 million SPM, give or take. Every planet is well established. You can see a lot of the volcanoes right here. And just quick glimpses at the main part of the Fulgora base. Over here. Gleba over here. Here's a kilo. And Nauvis basically consists of a blue, gray, and purple science setup, along with just mainly labs, lots and lots of cargo bays, and a very large space biter complex. So that's where we are right now. I'll be making more detailed videos on each of these planets in the future, but as stated, this is more of a progression guide as to how we got to this point and the most optimal decisions to get here without wasting a ton of time. Okay, so overall, I see the game right now as progressing in 3 phases. First, there is the exploration phase, then there is the quality phase, and finally, there is the phase that this is right now at, which is the Megabase phase. So in the exploration phase, which is the first phase, you are mainly worried about traveling to the different planets and unlocking their key technologies. EMPs, foundries, biolabs, stack inserters, and so on, and incorporating those upgrades into the rest of your planet-based designs. Once you have finished with that phase, once you have acquired all the basics and you have unlocked legendary quality, you are going to focus mainly on the quality phase, which means you are going to make a quality ship and make large amounts of quality material so you can get everything made in legendary quality. I have a separate video on that. There should be a link right up here for those of you who've missed it. And after you've acquired everything in legendary quality, then you can start setting up the big boys where all your assembling machines and inserters and whatnot are in legendary quality and produce science in very, very large quantities. Real quick note on quality science. As of right now, I generally don't believe it's worth the UPS. Essentially, you're going to use way more UPS to make legendary quality science than it would take to just make mass amounts of normal science. There's a couple places where this might be a little debatable, but in general, I have never seen anyone who's doing quality science get anywhere near the same level of SPM as those who are just using quality machines to make large amounts of basic science. So that's a bit of a trap. One other thing that's a bit of a trap. Don't put quality modules in your miners and recyclers on Fulgora. That's bait. That's bait. It produces a whole mess of materials. You struggle to get, basic stuff to get your electromagnetic science going. So don't do that. So those 2 things, real quick, avoid them. Okay. So back to the beginning. You're going to start on Nauvis, and for that, we're going to take a quick look at one of my older saves over here. This is, I think, the oldest one I currently have right now. This is 3 months ago when I made my first Gleba video. But this is, I think, the one save that still has my main novice bus intact that I used to start with the game with. So this was my old starting base from 1.1. I had a very thorough bus design that I had set up for that, and when I started, this is actually still my first Space Age game, even though I've put something like 600 hours in it now. And this was basically straight lifted from 1.1. This isn't particularly good for Space Age. It's really a 1.1 design that needs to be heavily updated, and we'll be tackling that at some point. But I'm showing you this just so you have some general idea of how I actually started the game and what it looked like and what I will be changing going into the future. So right now, the way I see it is, in general, you kind of want to get off Novice ASAP. So compared to what I have here, the thing I'm going to be designing in the future is going to be a lot smaller. So, but regardless of how you handle things, you're going to progress through red science, green science, gray science, and blue science more or less normally. That part's kind of unavoidable. You can kind of try to skip gray if you want, but it's not really recommended if you're playing, again, mostly on default settings, because the biters will get quite annoying if you have no damage upgrades whatsoever. So those four are going to progress more or less how you originally would. And after that is when the choices begin. Because you can get white science directly after blue science, and once you get white science, you can go directly to space. Now, this is where the tech tree really changes from 1.1, because in 1.1 you had logistic network gated behind yellow science, and you had stuff like Covarex gated behind purple science. But now both of those two things are gated behind space science. They're gated behind the white. So they're not as important, but they're still important. But essentially, the first choice you are faced with once you progress is, do you go to another planet immediately after Novice, or do you set up purple and yellow first? I think setting up yellow on Novice maybe isn't so worth it anymore. There's an argument for setting up purple. If you set up even some basic purple on Novice before you leave, then you can research mining prod while you're, working out Volcanus and all that. You'll at least have one good infinite research to start working on. And mining prod early on is very, very good. I mean, it's good no matter what, but it really makes the most impact in the first, 10, 20 hours of the game. That just requires purple, red, green, and blue. You don't need anything else for that. If you are doing the achievement, then obviously you're not setting up purple on Novice, or if you are, you're just not starting it up until you do something else in space. The way I kind of want to try to approach things in the future is maybe skipping purple and yellow on Novice and just getting to Volcanus ASAP. And one of the main reasons why I want to do that is because I don't want to be dealing with a solid bus system any longer than I have to. If we look at the current game, if we look at the 1 million SPM base right now, one thing you will notice is that I don't do solid buses anymore, aside from Gleba, where they're somewhat unavoidable. On Volcanus, we have iron, copper, and sulfuric acid on a liquid bus. On Nauvis, it's those exact same three metals, or liquids, I should say. On Fulgora, I've kind of chosen three for every planet. On Fulgora, it's heavy oil, holmium, and sulfuric acid again. And finally, on Aquilo, the three liquids are lithium brine, fluoroketone, and crude oil. So the sooner you get off Novice, the less regular stuff you'll be building, and the less you'll have to refactor later. As you can see right now, that old solid bus is completely gone. You can kind of see where the old base used to be, but that got alt-D'd a long, long time ago. We're now completely on foundries and EMPs. The only semblance of a bus are the red circuits, which are just going from here to here, and I might integrate them along with the blue circuits in the future. And, yeah. So there you go. So let's hop back to the earlier game. And let's take a look at the technologies there. So, if we are looking at our science technologies, if we look at what's under each one, The main things that are actually important under purple and yellow, purple is mainly going to be beacons. It's required for infinite robot speed, and is along with yellow. And again, the mining prod. Those are kind of the three you care about the most right there. And we already talked about the mining prod. Under yellow, fission reactor is arguably one of the biggest ones because it lets you actually get bots going, personal bots in order to build everything. And again, it's required for robo speed. And lastly, the one that tends to be easily quite overlooked but is really important is inserter capacity bonus. This helps a lot with your basic inserters. So, oh yeah, and we of course have Power Armor Mark II under yellow as well. So yellow is very much about your personal gear right now. Purple is mainly just beacons and mining prod. It is what's really important. I want to talk for a minute about robot speed here. This upgrade is not requiring electromagnetic for the first, I think, 5 or 6 levels. Yeah, we can see it right here. It's yellow for just the first, yeah, yellow for the first couple levels, then it adds purple, and then finally it adds electromagnetic. I consider this to be probably the second most important infinite research after mining prod. Robots suck without bot speed. They suck. Like, it's actually, they're almost not even worth it until you get bot speed. In fact, in my early armors, when I initially get armors with grid, the modular armor and early power armor, I think it's better to just do exoskeletons only so you can travel around faster and forget the bots and still build things by hand. You can have base robots that are deployed from roboports, but I think doing personal robos over exoskeletons really isn't worth it until you get both the larger armors and at least, like, say, half a dozen levels of bot speed. That's when they actually really start to shine. As you can see right now, you can see our speed of bots. Like, what's our bot speed at here on this game right now? We're already at 9. We're actually, we're not even at, like, the first 6. And look how slow they still relatively move. They aren't quite snail pace anymore, but they're pretty damn slow. So that's something worth considering. So a bit more on how you would want to progress past Nauvis. So okay, you've gotten your white science going. You're launching rockets. You're established white science in space, and you're now at the point where you decide, purple and yellow. As I said, it's worth considering purple on Nauvis. Achievement stuff notwithstanding, it's worth considering it just to be able to get mining prod going. But there's also an argument for just leaving Nauvis like ASAP, not even worrying about it, because getting some early purple set up on Volcanus is arguably going to be a bit easier than Nauvis. Right now, in late game on my 1 million base, I have purple set up on Nauvis. But that is probably the most debatable science in terms of whether you want to do it on Volcanus or Nauvis. Under white science, the important stuff under there, aside from the logistic network that I mentioned, the logistic system, the next most important things are going to be all your tier 2 modules. You're going to be on T2 modules probably for quite a while. And white science unlocks them, and you only need the chips for the tier 2 modules. You don't need the tungsten carbide or the biter eggs or anything like that. So you're going to be on those for a good long time before you're ready to hop up to tier 3. So the sooner you jump up to them, the better. Incorporate those with the beacons, and you'll be set for a while. Covarex is another story. Covarex is something that I consider to be relatively high priority in 1.1 because you're trying to get Nauvis on nuclear power ASAP, which means you want Covarex, etc., etc. I think there's an argument right now for getting off Nauvis before you even get Covarex or before you even get nuclear. Like, when I redesign this base for 2.0, I'm planning on making it a lot smaller. Like, I want to just make the bare minimum I need to just get the hell off Nauvis ASAP. And then I'm not even going to care if the biters eat Nauvis. We'll come back and reconquer the planet later, and turn it into a good old biolab outpost. But it's going to be a lot smaller. I'm definitely going to be dropping to at least, probably no more than 2 of each metal type and be using a lot more direct insert and integrated blade modules that I use in my Megabase rather than this standard bus design. So, you've decided whether or not you're doing yellow or purple on Nauvis and you're ready to leave. Which planet do you go to first? This is probably one of the most hotly debated topics in the Factorio community, but if you're watching this video, I'm going to tell you the order of Vulcanus, then Fulgora, then Gleba, in that order. There's some arguments to be made for doing some planets in other orders, so, some advanced strategies, doing Fulgora or Gleba first. I think there is a good amount of potential going for Fulgora first, because it lets you get your bot speed up quickly, get your mech armor quickly, and EM plants arguably impact Vulcanus more than Foundries impact Fulgora. But we'll talk about we'll talk about the advanced strategies at the end of the video. Right now, I think the order that if you are watching this kind of video and looking for pointers should absolutely be Vulcanus, then Fulgora, then Gleba, especially if this is still your first space age run. Vulcanus is the simplest planet. It essentially operates most similarly to Nauvis, except it's much more fluid based, obviously. You can take a look at my old Vulcanus system here in this old run as well. And it generally doesn't have any head scratching puzzles. It's if anything, it's easier than Nauvis once you understand the real strength of the fluid system and the foundries. It's a bit tricky with the oil processing, but it's not that hard. One other just big general tip when you first start traveling other planets, a lot of the technologies are unlocked not from the tech tree, but from mining the resources by hand on the planet. Like mining calcite by hand unlocks the steam, the sulfuric acid to steam recipe and so on. So make sure you keep an eye on the tech tree and unlock those. Like here, I can show you a couple of those. Like right here. Calcite processing right now. You mine entity calcite by hand or from a drill or whatever, and it actually unlocks 3 recipes. And there's a bit of this on every planet, so don't overlook that. If you feel right when you land on the planet, see what you need to do in order to unlock them. Just take a look at what's listed right under the planet. There's also the tips and tricks section here that most people don't even realize it exists. These are actually relatively useful and have briefings on each planet as well. You should read these. If the developers are putting the tips and tricks in the game and they're literally just sitting right here, they're probably worth paying attention to. The other tip, just general tip you want to be aware of, something I talked about in my tips video that I made a couple months ago. When you're traveling to Vulcanus or Fulgora, I highly recommend bringing about 200 or so refined concrete on your first trip there. Both foundries and EM plants require them, and while you're going to be making refined concrete on both those planets, it will make your start a good bit smoother if you have that material to begin with and can get your basic building set up much quicker. This is especially relevant on Vulcanus because the recipe you want to use for concrete is a foundry recipe, concrete from molten iron, and if you don't bring refined concrete, then you need to set up, something in order to make refined concrete with a regular assembling machine. Then you're going to dismantle it, etc., etc. And as I said, one of the big things that I'm trying to focus on in this guide is minimizing refactoring. So bring some refined concrete to those 2 planets. It will make your start a bit smoother. It's just a one-time thing. This does not mean continuously import. I just mean the first time you go there, bring 200 and you're good. Alright, so now let's talk about what actually gets unlocked at every planet that you actually care about. So we're going to hop back into the main game here. And we're going to look at the key technologies from each planet, starting with Vulcanus. So over here, under Vulcanus, the big things you care about from this planet are mining drills, cliff explosives, artillery, green belt, this is a big one, and the foundry, if I didn't say that already. You want those 5 are the big ones, that the big technologies that actually matter. and that are going to have a high impact on other planets. On Fulgora, the big technologies you care about are mech armor. You want this ASAP. As soon as you land on Fulgora, this should be your absolute #1 priority until you get a mech armor. And then ideally, since you have access to recyclers, gamble for at least a rare one. I mean, I shouldn't say at least. Gamble for only a rare one. Don't try gambling any higher than that. Just, use a gamble circuit. I have another video on that. I'll put another link up here for that, for those of you who've missed that one. And get yourself a rare mech armor with some rare exoskeletons, rare Roboport Mark IIs, etc., etc. This will make a big difference and will make constructing everything else on other planets much smoother. You obviously also want the EM plant. That should go without saying. Tesla turrets are useful, but they're not like as critical as artillery is. They are a bit more useful on Gleba than any other planet. It's actually really the only planet I have them significantly deployed on, other than just like spot covering buildings that happen to hold biter eggs on Nauvis and other planets. Yeah, Tesla is nice, but is probably the least important of the four major Fulgora techs, which the three big ones I would say are EMP, Foundry, and Mech. Okay, and I guess recycling is arguably a major tech too, but you unlock recycling almost immediately. You don't actually have to research it. You just scrap something. You just mine the vault ruin. Oh, a quick note on those vault ruins. I kind of almost completely forgot about these. These vault ruins are the big circular patches that are over the big scrap patches. If you're having trouble finding it at the start, yeah, it's like a big circular ruin. Here, let me see if I can find one for you real quick. But they will appear. Here's one. Yeah, right here. You see? You look for... On Fulgora, you'll have small patches on the big islands. When you're first landing on Fulgora, by the way, also scout out and make sure you find a big island. I see, it's really funny every now and then. Someone posts a thread on Reddit or whatever going like, I have no room on Fulgora. And you see them like building their entire base on one of these islands because they don't realize you're going to walk on the oil. And it's really funny and kind of sad to see at the same time. But yeah, when you land on Fulgora, scout a bit, find a nice big island. Ideally, a couple islands that can be connected with a big power pole. Like right here, these islands can be connected with a big power pole. That's actually really important because that means you can have your big accumulator fields not on your main island. So ideally, scout out a couple big ones. Like if I hadn't had these here, this would have been another good cluster right here, and so on. You just place down, or these two. This is good too. Place down, big power poles at the edges and make sure you can connect it. And don't be afraid to scout a bit until you can find a good spot to build. Gleba. The key technologies on Gleba. Ignore that. The biters are angry. So if we go to Gleba, the big technologies you want of Gleba, there's only really two. There is Stack Inserter, which is huge, and the biggest one, well, it's hard to say if it's the biggest one because, Biolab is also big. But these essentially act as multipliers to all the rest of your planets. I've heard people arguing going for Gleba, first because of these, but I'm not entirely convinced by that. Again, we'll talk more about advanced planet strategies at the end of the video. But stack inserters and biolabs are the two biggest things you want to shoot for. Stack inserters are absolutely enormous, essentially quadrupling the capacity of all your belts and allowing you to make some very nice high throughput setups with them. You also get epic quality here, but that one should be obvious. And yeah, the rest of it is mainly Gleba specific technologies. Like you're not really going to use biochambers off Gleba, especially with the state that mining prod is in right now. Like I don't have biochambers deployed anywhere, any planet other than Gleba in this base, except for when I needed to make legendary fish on Nauvis for my legendary spiders, which is right here, and I'm just making that with the bioflux. I actually forgot to shut this thing down, and it's still going. Or no, my fish spoiled apparently. I don't know. Who cares? I already have my spiders. Alright, so you've left Nauvis, you've gotten to Volcanus, I think that if you were proceeding in the order that I recommended here, Volcanus, Fulgora, Gleba, I think it is very, very much worth it to not leave Volcanus until you have established a green belt factory like this. These are still normal foundries. This is still like the basic one that I've had going for probably a couple months now. I've been meaning to design a recipe switching fancy version of this, but I'll get to it at some point. And you want to basically stay on Volcanus. I didn't even realize I didn't even have this hooked up anymore. I should probably worry about that. But I think it's a good idea to stay on Volcanus until you have established a very large green belt factory so you can just start exporting green belt everywhere. Now you might be thinking like, why are you so worried about green belt? When you're building your other stuff, you can just build it with a lower belt and upgrade it. It's really nice to just have a shitload of green belt relatively close to the start of the game and build everything with it. And one thing to keep in mind, the green belt underground is a much longer distance than the other belts. And that makes a big difference when designing things. Like, for example, if you look at everyone's starting bus, from 1.1 or even 2.0, anyone who's actually doing a starting bus, you'll always notice their belts are in, like, groups of 4, right? Like, it's always something like this and like this with 2 spaces in between. The reason people always do the groups of 4 like that is because that's the maximum that a yellow belt underground can span, is those 4 tiles. Any more than that, and you won't be able to have to span undergrounds underneath that, and you will have to duck the belts under or something like that. So by switching to higher tier belts relatively quickly, you heavily alleviate that design restriction and can do much larger buses and just different designs that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise because you now have a much longer underground belt length. So it kind of flows like this. This is the way I see it kind of working. You land on Volcanus. You've essentially more or less abandoned Nauvis. You've got red, green, and blue, and gray there, with white going on in space. Some basic lab setups. You surrounded the whole area with turrets. You're probably still on coal power, but you sort of don't care if Nauvis gets destroyed. I mean, ideally it doesn't. Ideally, you keep your starting labs there and are just launching the science back. But I think it's not necessarily the worst thing if Nauvis gets destroyed, because as I said, you're going to refactor the whole thing once you go to Liquid anyway. And it doesn't take long to set up the basic sciences, even without legendary quality, on Volcanus. So you want to set those up, purple, yellow. A quick note on purple and yellow. Because bot speed requires both, regardless of whether you go to Fulgora or Volcanus first, you're probably going to want to set up both of those on whatever your first planet is, so you can get that bot speed going ASAP. Purple is arguably a bit easier to set up on Fulgora, but I think yellow is a bit easier to set up early on. Sorry, purple is a bit easier to set up on Volcanus, but I think yellow is a bit easier to set up on Fulgora. So, because like 2 of the 3 things you need for yellow science on Fulgora come out of there. I don't think long-term yellow on Fulgora is a good idea. I used to have a big yellow set up over here. Some of you may remember it before I redid it and moved it to Volcanus down here with a much more involved setup. But the key thing to keep in mind with the early game science is buffering. Buffering. Generally, the only sciences that you actually need to be producing at your maximum rate are red, green, and blue. Not everything requires purple, not everything requires yellow, and if you switch between researches, you can make a lower SPM into a much higher SPM, a much higher effective SPM, simply by, we're going to do purple until the purple gets a bit low, keep an eye on our science meter or something like that, and then switch to something that takes yellow and not purple, such as one of the damage researches, like laser damage, and then go back and forth. And you can basically get away with half as much. This is why I think buffering science, those couple sciences, in the mid-game is absolutely huge, especially if you're going to do yellow on Fulgora. Because even though yellow long-term on Fulgora is shit, if you're just buffering lots of it, you can have a relatively small setup get away with producing a much higher effective SPM by use of that buffering. So basically, as long as it's not red, green, and blue, I think you should heavily buffer the hell out of it. You know, I'm talking like multiple steel chests. Like here we have, you know, a single legendary steel chest on each one in the early game. I'm talking putting like, you know, easily 3, 4 just regular steel chests when you don't have legendary to create like a large buffer for when you make it on Fulgora or whatnot. I think that's a really, really strong thing to do that a lot of people tend to overlook a bit. All right, so more on what science is on what planets. If you are progressing, again, like we're talking about Volcanus first, you're probably going to want to set up, if you hit Volcanus first, you're probably going to want to hit up a basic yellow science, again, on Volcanus, maybe. And the reason I say maybe is the one big tech that kind of screws you in this regard. I always type the color and not the name. Is the fission reactor for your personal gear, which I am blind and can't see right now, but it's, oh, there it is. It's right there. Portable fission reactor actually requires yellow. So, you know, if you're doing logistic bot embargo when you're just going to Volcanus ASAP and just setting up purple or whatnot, you're going to want to get your bots going on whatever the second planet is you're on. You know, assuming Nauvis is your first, whatever the second one. You don't want to be waiting for to go, oh, Volcanus, then Fulgora, then getting your bots. Whatever the second planet is, you're going to want, you know, some mining prod, some bot speed, and ideally your fission reactor going just to be able to get your basic armor to be a little less shit. So if you're going to Volcanus first, yeah, you might want to set up a temporary yellow on Volcanus. Maybe you can hold off and just do it on Fulgora more directly. It really depends on how big of a setup you're doing, how much stuff you're willing to place down by hand and whatnot. But there's a couple different options on how to progress this here. But I'm just showing you that this is really what's going to be the thing that's going to make you want to get yellow ASAP once you get off Nauvis. Like, you know, if you're, especially, you know, even if you're doing the achievement run where you're doing no purple, no yellow until you get to another planet, again, that first planet you go to, you're going to want to get those set up relatively quickly. Lastly, you only need about 100 SPM to finish the game as far as the exploration phase goes. You do not need a very high amount. I think I was only about 100 the whole time. I don't think I got much higher. I mean, eventually, once I incorporated stack inserters back to Nauvis, it got a little higher. But for like 90% of the time when I was just exploring, you know, I was basically at around, you know, the default 100-ish SPM that you get from a starter base. And honestly, you may even be able to go a little bit lower. You only really need higher SPM numbers when you're pushing, you know, the infinite researches. Like low SPM numbers for just getting the technologies unlocked is perfectly fine. So don't worry about super juicing your SPM when you're still in the exploration phase. It will naturally get juiced as you add beacons, modules, and stack inserters to everything. But as I said, this is more about minimizing the amount of refactoring. You may want to do some kind of baby refactor at some point once you get everything before you go legendary. But the whole idea behind the progression order that I'm trying to advocate here is to trying to minimize that. You know, you get off Nauvis ASAP, go to Volcanus, you're setting things up with mainly foundries. You'll still have to use assembling plants for circuits there. But then once you go to Fulgora and you have both foundry and EMP, from then you can basically make, you know, more advanced endgame-ish designs that don't require as much space and are much nicer to set up with the larger buildings. You know, and the thing with Factorio is the larger the building is, the better, the more stuff you can put on it. Like the latest abuse case we have of that is silo chest sorting on Fulgora, but that's a whole other story that I'll go in deeper in the Fulgora video because this video is turning out to be long enough. All right, so hopefully that gives you a good overview of what you should be focusing. The biters are very angry. And apparently the Donager took a hit at some point. Oh yeah, it's because I was pushing the egg count. I forgot. Yeah, 537k. But once you have finished the exploration phase, okay, so you've gone to all the planets. Okay, one thing I should talk a little about Aquila. I'm not going to go into Aquila too heavily. Aquila is one of those things, it's the last planet, so there's not much you need to think about of what order you're going to go to it. It has to be the last planet. You need, I think, pretty much other planet techs in order to even reach it. Yeah, you need electromagnetic, rocket turret. You need a bunch of techs from all the different planets to even unlock it. So Aquilo has to be done as the last planet, and it's pretty much an import only planet. It's essentially a test of your space logistics. Are your platforms good enough? Are you are your supply routes set up properly to launch stuff, receive stuff, etc., etc. And it's trying to design everything with heat pipes is a bit of a challenge, but it's also not a very unintuitive challenge. You just have to sit there and fiddle with things until you come up with something like this. Compared to, say, Fulgora and Gleba, which each have their own significant logistic and design challenge, that makes things much more complicated. Volcanus, again, is not challenging in that regard. It's really these two, Gleba and Fulgora, that are going to throw you in for a bit of a loop as a new player. Gleba is obviously mainly about managing spoilage and freshness, and Fulgora is mainly about managing excesses of things you don't want and figuring out how to produce everything you want with an inverted production cycle. Okay, so I think that more or less covers it for the exploration phase. So you've gone through all the planets, you've set up everything, acquired all the basic buildings, you've got your EM plant, your cryogenic, your foundry, etc., etc. Um, so let's talk a bit about quality now. So early on in the game, I don't think you should be focusing quality much at all. I think that you should set up some basic gamble circuits to when you're on Nauvis, you should set up some basic gamble circuits to maybe get like rare exoskeletons and that kind of thing. Like exoskeletons, maybe your armor. I don't know. I probably wouldn't even bother with the armor until I got to mech armor. I would just do like exoskeletons, and that's really probably the biggest one. Just getting some rare exoskeletons, and then once you get to Fulgora and you have the recycler and you actually have the ability to dispose of the extra instead of it just accumulating in a chest, you should focus on getting rare mech armor, rare exoskeletons again, rare roboports, Roboport Mark II, and miners and pump jacks. Miners and pump jacks are pretty important because they have this resource drain stat where the higher quality you get, the less they consume. This is multiplicative with mining prod. Once you're at like 1 mil SPM like I am right now, everything's basically infinite and this stat doesn't matter anymore. But in the early game, this will prevent your patches from depleting quickly. And if you get quality drills and pump jacks quickly enough, as well as mining prod, you can actually have some of your starting patches last forever. This is my starting coal. This one's still at 117. This one's still at 1 million. The starting iron and copper were gone long ago. But my starting uranium is still there. And we're still essentially off starting oil. I think I'm only hooked up to this eastern one right now, though. But you can see, the productivity is 17,480 at this point. It's an absolutely ridiculous amount that it will put out. This is 337, 4.4k a second, 3.6k a second, and so on. And the mining drills are also putting out like in ridiculous amounts, like 876 a second, with literally no modules in it, or no modules that affect the speed of that, and so on. So those things, your personal gear and mining and pump jacks are the only things I would really focus heavily on quality in the mid game. You can also do asteroid collectors and maybe solar panels for your ships if you want. I don't think I even have a ship still has solar panels. But yeah, solar panels are obviously, get about 50% better if you can get them up to rare. And the asteroid collectors are a bit better than that because the collection arm count goes up by 1 each. So going to rare essentially triples the arm count. So yeah, I would say collectors. I wouldn't really bother with thrusters or anything like that. And solar panels only if, you feel like you're doing well on everything else. Otherwise, don't worry about it and just make your ship a little bit bigger. But do not go overboard on quality in the mid game. Like just get those rare items on those few things I described, and then keep focusing on the exploration phase. Quick note on quality modules. Legendary T2s, Legendary T2 quality modules are 5% each. Legendary tier 3s are 6.2, but epic tier 3s are only 4.7. So legendary tier 2s are almost as good. Well, not almost as good, but they're better than anything except epic or anything except legendary tier 3s, and they are significantly easier to make. Significant. So I didn't do this on this run, but it's probably something I'll do in a future run, is focus on legendary T2s before you really start worrying about legendary T3s. Because legendary T3s require, either getting legendary biter eggs via something like this, or, just upcycling them in general with something like this, with biter eggs being, shipped to wherever you have it, or doing the modules on Nauvis. So that's a little bit of a tip that'll hopefully help you get your quality ship going a bit faster. That's not the quality ship. This is the quality ship. I'm not going to dive too heavily into quality in this video because it's already proving to be quite long, and I already made another video on quality. Check it up here. Hopefully I remember to put those cards in. And yeah, that's essentially just splice in the quality video at this point. Like at this point, if you haven't seen it yet, pause this video, go watch the quality video, and then come back, because that kind of fills in everything here that I'm kind of glossing over, which is how to get everything in legendary quality. So you've gone through the quality phase and you've acquired everything in legendary quality now. Now is when you can start designing the actual big designs. And so now is when we're going to talk a little bit about megabasing. So you don't really want to start megabasing and building really big stuff until you get legendary quality, for one simple reason. You don't want to be redoing all your designs after you've unlocked legendary quality. You don't want to design, I designed a big one for normal, and then I'm redoing it for rare, then redoing it for epic, then redoing it. No, fuck that shit. You only want to design it once, and you want to design it with the best stuff possible. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call the blade system. The blade system can be considered to be a subset of bus design, but it has some very important distinctions that separate it from a bus. As you saw on the older base, when you design a bus, you essentially have lots of rows of material, and you are adding and removing from those columns as needed. Usually not removing, but more often adding. And there's only one thing that I actually remove from the bus at some point, which is where we add gears. And then they end at a point and get replaced with something else in that lane. But that's the thing with a bus, is you keep adding materials. You've got lots of solids flowing down, etc., etc. And you've got stuff that takes what it needs and then puts what it generates either back onto the bus, out to the labs, or into provider chests, depending on what you're doing. So a blade design differs from bus design in the sense that it does not expand. It only uses liquids or stuff that doesn't easily run out, and is much more integrated. So all of these we consider blades, but I think a kilo right now is probably one of the better ones to illustrate it on right now, where we have just these three fluids coming in, and then everything that's needed to make the science is in one integrated block that becomes very easy to expand, because I can just copy paste this down and stamp it down. The lithium brine is coming straight off the pump jacks, which are super juiced with prod, 1.2k a second, etc., and so on, out of a single pump jack. This one's 1.6. The oil, the same thing. So it's really just a fluoroketone that needs its own little producing section. And other than that, we take advantage of Fluid 2.0 to just put a very high amount down there. And we call it a blade design because once you have it all set up, they kind of look like, fan blades or something like that, or turbine blades that are just off a central shaft. The shaft, we do not expand or anything off the central bus, or we don't we set it up with a way that it can't really run out. As I described in the beginning of the video, I have liquids on every planet as part of the bus there. And with Fluid 2.0, we try to keep those pipeline extents under 320 so we can put a very, very large amount into them without needing to put a shitload of pumps. If they have to go longer, then you have to do something like this. I started having iron problems on my blue science. I was training it in, but I realized that the number of trains that needed to come in was getting a bit ridiculous. So I wound up hooking it up directly to this iron field, which is way to the east. And hey, if I had gotten mining prod and quality drills a bit sooner, then I could have done it off my original iron patch. But hey, that's something I'll try to improve for the next game. But yeah, having it be fluid is a key part of this, because if you're doing a solid bus, you have to keep refreshing it. A fluid bus doesn't really need to be refreshed. You can just put an insane amount into the one end and then make these coherent blades that just take in the basic liquids and then turn it into what you want. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to do a Megabase. Most other people working on right now, there's only like 2 other streamers who are heavily working on Megabasing stuff right now. It's Will and Inter. They're both using much heavier train systems, and that's of course a valid option too. I decided to do this idea, and it worked out pretty well, and I've been committing to it. I'm hoping it's better for UPS. So far, it looks like it hasn't been too bad. We're still maintaining 60 while holding our 1 million over here, give or take, and we can go a bit higher. The Prometheum platforms are a whole nother story as far as time usage goes. Like right now, it's up to 13 because both of these are out here. But if both of these were at home, we're down even as low as 6 right now, and that's with 1.3 on biters, because that's a whole nother story right now. So yeah, that's how I've done things, is with these coherent blade designs. We have our blue science blades here on Nauvis. We have our red and green science blades on Vulcanus. Gleba, it's this is actually where the blade design was born, was to manage the spoilage and the nutrients and the bioflux and everything, is just having one coherent setup with lots of loops. It has since evolved into these right now. So these are solids, not liquids, obviously, but if you've been to Gleba, you've noticed that fruit is very dense. So this is technically a bit more of a bus here, but it's a blade in spirit because we're only doing the basic materials. It's only the 2 types of fruit, and that's it. We are not adding bioflux nutrients or penapod eggs or anything else onto it. It's basic materials only, then single integrated coherent designs that do everything that we wanted to do. And I'll be going into these in much further detail when I finally get around to making planet-specific videos, which I'll do, sometime after we're actually fully stabilized at 1 million plus. Okay. One other thing regarding megabasing. Preloading. What is preloading? Preloading is when you insert items into the silo before the rocket is ready to launch. So right now you can see as the rocket was heading up, the science got loaded up, and the rocket launched immediately when it was ready. There was no delay. If you fire off rockets like this, you can fire off a rocket about once every 27 seconds. Whereas if you want bots to be loading your silos, the problem is you have to wait until this rocket emerges from the silo before you start loading it with science, and the time between launches is much longer. I would go as far as to say preloading is mandatory for anyone serious about megabasing. I started doing this pretty early, and now pretty much everyone else has followed suit and is also starting to preload. It is much more efficient in terms of reducing bot traffic, etc., and reducing silo count and so on. These are some older blades I have right here, where we had the science still going onto a belt before it got loaded in. The newer designs do not have that. The newer designs load directly from the manufacturer into a buffer chest and then load into a silo. No science belt at all. The only things belted in the middle are the things that are actually needed to make the science. Like a kilo over here, and Fulgora over here, and even Gleba over here are good examples of the more modern blade design we've been working with. It's something that I'm going to keep sticking with in the foreseeable future because it's worked out quite well so far. I will be updating these to no longer have belts at some point, but these are a little weirder because, you know, it's all the normal machines. It's going to wind up looking more like the yellow will in some ways or something. As far as what science per second you want to preload, I have found that about this is good. About 16 or so is enough for one machine. 16, 20-ish is enough for one machine to preload in a chest, in a silo, and being able to sustain full SPM without getting bottlenecked anywhere or anything like that. This assumes 500 kilometer second platforms and instant unloading, which everyone's unloading should now be instant because they fixed that bug. There was a video on the bug for those of you who missed it. But yeah, that is now resolved, and ships basically just instantly fully unload now. I'll try to catch the Scopuli once it arrives at Nauvis over here in a minute, so you can see that in action as well. But definitely preload. Maybe in the early game, when you are setting up stuff on each planet, you might not want to preload. But honestly, on my next run, even with my first science setups on other planets with normal stuff, normal foundries, normal EM plants, and whatnot, I am definitely going to be preloading as much as I can. You want to have the bots bring in the rocket parts. I mean, okay, this is a bad example because this is yellow science, and two of the things required for yellow science are required for the rockets anyways. So that's why these belts do the squiggle. But if you look at orange over here, we've got the bots bringing in the rocket parts on the outside here, and we have a train that comes in that brings the rocket parts over here. And I caught it just in time. We have 288k science right now. But this is essentially how your ship should look. They should be traveling around 500 kilometers a second once you've got legendary thrusters and whatnot. And the science should basically instantly unload back to Nauvis, and then they should head back out. Other important things. I mentioned, as I said, how mining speed, mining prod, and bot speed are probably the most important infinite researches to be focusing on early. This is especially true in megabasing. You want to get all of these up to 300 prod with prod modules inside. You can push them so that they're 300 prod without prod modules inside, but that will take a good bit longer. But you want your buildings, like, let's say, what's a good example right now? Like, where's the plastic? Yeah, like legendary plastic. This one's pretty easy because you can put up to 8 prod modules in there, so you only need to get 100 prod off that. But you want to essentially push all of those to 300 as quickly as you can as well. That won't take very long once you're actually up megabasing, but don't neglect mining prod and bot speed too much, to favor those, because that will have a larger impact in the amount of resources you consume or don't consume early on. Other researches are relatively self-explanatory. There's prods and damage and so on. So I'm not going to go too much into that. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is going to be Prometheum science and the Prometheum research. I originally started designing my Prometheum ships before I had legendary stuff going, and I kind of regretted that decision because I wound up refactoring them or upgraded them once I had legendary stuff, and they wound up being super over ratioed. Then I wound up redesigning it for legendary, etc., etc. Anyway, you may want to have like one super basic Prometheum ship that just uses non-legendary, that doesn't go very far, maybe just does 10, 20k eggs or something like that, so that you can get a little bit early on, because those first few levels are very, very cheap in terms of researching them, and it will take you some time to set up, everything to get a full legendary Prometheum ship like this, especially, if you're going legendary fusion reactors as well. But that one I will leave up to you as to whether you want to do it or not. I think it probably is worth it to set up some small, like Prometheum ship, maybe even with lots of buffered ammo and whatnot. That, as I said, just to get those first basic levels in, so you can easily like double, triple your SPM while you're working on everything else. But I wouldn't go too overboard designing large, non-legendary quality Prometheum ships, because once you get, again, full legendary quality, you're going to be redesigning everything anyway. I don't think I have the old design saved anywhere because it was kind of shit, and I was kind of like, screw that. But yeah, okay. So here's one of them. Yeah, okay. This is actually a pretty old design, but yeah, this was pretty much mostly normal, except for like, okay, it had some legendary. Okay, this one I had upgraded to legendary, but it was ratioed for normal. But yeah, this is how many cryogenic plants I needed when they were all normals in order to get a decent Prometheum ship going, and how much rockets I had going, and so on, and all the foundries and etc. etc. Giant fusion reactor. And as you can see, once you get legendary, the factory must shrink, and now we're down to only 4 explosives as well. And I'm also working on a non-rocket Prometheum platform right now, which doesn't have any rockets. This one still needs a bit of work, and this one's only down to 1 explosive cryogenic plant. But yeah, I tried to go no rockets, no guns. I think we do need the guns, but I think we can definitely do one without the rockets to have that going and have it be even smaller. This one's down to 1800. So yeah, Prometheum science. You're going to be redesigning your ship once you get full legendary. So whether you want to make a lower quality one of that is up to you. But the early research levels for Prometheum science are very cheap, much like all the other infinite researches. And it scales up not as slow as mining prod, but it doesn't double each time. Like this is what, 348, 418, then 502. It goes up by around, I don't know, like 30%, something like that with every level. So it's not as shallow as mining prod, which barely increases from level to level. It's still 1.7, 1.7, 1.7, 1.7. It's truncating the rest, which is why mining prod gets so ridiculously high. But yeah, something to consider. All right. I do believe that covers most of what I was trying to do in here. This is obviously a very comprehensive video, and I know I've probably omitted some stuff and skipped over some stuff, but it's the nature of doing something this big. The actual last thing I want to talk about are some advanced planet strategies regarding which planets to go to first. As I said, I've kind of been recommending the Volcanus, Fulgora, and Gleba route. I have considered doing a Fulgora before Volcanus path. Excuse me. Fulgora before Volcanus path, because it would get you the mech armor sooner and let you get your robos and your quality robos all that much sooner, which would help in building everywhere else. Fulgora is also potentially a very fast planet once you understand it well. I wouldn't recommend this for new players to Space Age. I think that if you're brand new, you should stick to Volcanus, Fulgora, Gleba. But if you are, on your second run and you already kind of know the basics of Space Age, I think Fulgora first is worth considering, mainly because of how much of an impact getting a good mech armor with good roboports and whatnot affects the rest of the planets. It's also a very fast planet to get off of because, you essentially start with all the high-end ingredients. 2 of the 3 things you need to launch rockets come directly out of the scrap. So if you know what you're doing, you can really get that planet set up very, very quickly. And EM plants affect Volcanus more than mining drills affect Fulgora. Obviously, you still want the big mining drills on Fulgora, but they're really easy to swap in, right? Like, you just use the normal mining drills, then when you get the big ones unlocked, you just come back with them and swap them all out. It's a much smaller change than tearing down your entire green, red, and blue circuit factories on Volcanus and then setting them up with EM plants. So going Fulgora before Volcanus is something that I might consider. The thing that's kind of like making me want to stick with Volcanus first is having Greenbelt on Fulgora will help significantly, especially when you don't have stack inserters yet and whatnot, to just get good throughput scrap setups going on that planet, because that planet tends to get belt bottlenecked a lot faster than the other planets, and you're obviously not going to have very high bot speed early on to actually do a proper bot base like the way this works right now. So that's something to consider. I think that's a little bit more of an advanced strategy, but it's something I might be trying my next run, is going Fulgora before Volcanus, because you're going to be tearing down, your initial. You can't go bots immediately on Fulgora unless you stay on Volcanus for a while and get lots and lots of bot speed and then go to Fulgora, but you're probably not going to do that. You're going to get the stuff you need to set up on Volcanus, and then you're going to go to Fulgora and then worry about bot speed on the way. You're not going to sit on Volcanus twiddling your thumbs waiting for bot speed 10 to finish researching with a decent sized purple and yellow setup there. You'll be done with Volcanus before that, most likely. So yeah, it's something worth considering. It's something worth considering is doing Fulgora a bit sooner, because there's overall less refactoring to be done if you go to Fulgora first, then Volcanus, and then Gleba. A word on Gleba first. I don't recommend this at all unless you just want to do it for the challenge or the memes. Gleba is a bit more insular from than other planets, because it doesn't have to export a lot of things compared to Volcanus and Fulgora. It's very much just revolves around the biochambers. The thing is, you still, unless you're importing LDS and blue chips, you still do need to set those things up as well, and that's where the new buildings do help quite a bit. Artillery also makes a really big difference on Gleba, because it completely trivializes the stompers. If anyone, like, the Venn diagrams of people who have artillery on Gleba and people who have issues with stompers on Gleba are two completely separate circles. Like, it completely trivializes them, and I've never heard anyone who's I've ever heard complain about Gleba enemies, they never have artillery, ever. A small note on Gleba defenses. These are my Gleba defenses. That's it. These aren't even legendary quality. These are still the basic ones that I set up, that I started using at the start of the game. It's simply 2 Tesla turrets with about 10 laser turrets, filtered rockets to only shoot the bigger guys in a single cannon, and that's it. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of those set up around my base right now. There used to be as low as 4 or 6 or so. And that will just completely shut down all of them. I still need to clear the stompers further out on this planet as well to reduce that update time. But that's a project that's coming up in the near future. But yeah, this is all you need. If you see someone building massive walls of either walls or turrets on Gleba, I don't want to say they're doing it wrong, because, it technically does work. Okay, you know what? I'm going to say, no, they're doing it wrong. They're doing it wrong. They're really, really doing it wrong. You really shouldn't be doing that. Like, you need to understand point-based defense, which is a difficult thing to understand when every other form of defense we've seen in Factorio is like wall-based defense, such as on Nauvis. But with point-based defense, we shoot the nest with the cannons, and the enemies only come to those points. And then they get taken care of there. We don't need a big continuous wall. The big guys can walk over walls anyway. So yeah, point-based defense like this is all you need. It's these very small setups, and they're all hooked up to the main robo network right there. No trains delivering stuff to the edges like we have on Nauvis or anything like that. So, there you go. I hope this helps you guys out. I know it was a bit long and a bit... I hope it was comprehensive. I hope I'm not forgetting anything, but I probably have, and we'll wind up adding it in a pinned comment later or something like that. But that should more or less cover most of the things that I can think about regarding how to progress in Space Age. So hopefully this helps you guys out. My name is Stupid Fat Hobbit. I stream at Twitch TV SF Hobbit, and thanks for watching.